To build out the content of this webcast, we gathered questions from a number of talent professionals, and so I am here to pose those questions to our CEO, Charlie Atkinson. I'd like to start, Charlie, by asking you why this topic. Why is AI so important right now?
Well, thanks, Jenna, and thanks, Delilah. It's really great to be here today. Good question. Why AI? Well, our business lives today are characterized by three constant challenges. We see data overload. It is incessant and growing constantly. We see limited time. There's simply not enough hours in the day to read and absorb all the information that comes our way. And we see a non-stop stream of decisions that are really important, that affect our success and performance of our businesses and our lives, of ourselves, our colleagues, and our candidates. So riding over the horizon to rescue us from this never-ending wave of data and decisions is the promise of support from a new wave of digital assistants powered by artificial intelligence. I've seen firsthand how poor talent decisions have devastating consequences on people's lives, and I've seen how we can use technology, particularly AI-backed pre-employment testing, to radically improve our talent decisions.
We are asked a lot exactly how AI is being used in business. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, sure. Let me start by saying that artificial intelligence is not a replacement for human intelligence. The two are very different. So they complement each other very well. Computers can analyze a lot of data. It takes a huge amount to overload them. Computers carry out this analysis extremely quickly, far faster than a human, and they don't tire. When the information is appropriately well structured, they do it very, very accurately. So, examples. So, for example, the NSA uses computers running artificial intelligence algorithms to constantly monitor emails and other communications for phrases related to national security. The quantity of data is enormous. There are 270 billion emails sent each day. That is more than 3 million each second. And this monitoring has to be done in virtual real time. And of course, as we know, the stakes are extremely high. The AI is great at sifting through this enormous data set and identifying potential issues for human analysts to then review and act upon. Another example would be American Express, who uses AI to help it monitor 110 million cards every day to detect fraud. Just imagine going through that many transactions by hand and trying to spot inconsistencies. They do it so well that 4 out of 5 issues are spotted by their AI-powered algorithms before the card user has even noticed them. And at the end of the process, it is still the cardholder who is asked to verify if a transaction is fraudulent. A really interesting one that I came across very recently is a company called Infovision. These guys are in China using AI to review more than 1.4 billion CT scans each year in order to diagnose cancer. The computers are able to review far more data points on each scan. They don't get tired or distracted, and they work much, much more quickly than human radiologists. The AI is great at sifting through these huge numbers of scans and very diligently reviewing them all. When it's extracted the high-risk scans, it passes them to an experienced radiologist to confirm its findings. In each case, we can see that AI is valuable because it can sift through large amounts of data and identify complex patterns. But at present, humans are still better at making the final decisions.
And specific to HR, I'd like to explore a little bit more about how AI is being used. So I'd like to ask a poll question to the audience out there and understand if your organization is using AI technology in recruitment right now. Do they use any of the six options below? Social media chatbots to engage candidates, AI to screen applications and resumes or CVs, chatbots to schedule candidate interviews, automated video interview analysis, other AI-based technology, or no AI-based technology yet. So I'd love to just take a minute to see how we go with that.
While we're having a look at your answers coming through here, I might mention a few ways that we're working on AI applications within talent and HR. So one of the things that we're using AI to do is to identify individuals' development needs, and the AI is helping us to link those to appropriate training resources. We're also measuring compatibility of work colleagues and helping to build more productive teams. And of course, in recruitment, where AI is helping us to make faster and more effective talent decisions. So let's see what kind of results you guys are coming up with. It looks like pretty much everybody is saying that AI has not made it through to their organizations yet. So we came up with lots of options. We could have just come up with a yes or no, I guess, on that one. But fascinating to see that. There's a lot of opportunity out there. So hopefully this is the chance for us to take you through a couple of options of where you could start using these things. We have seen in the recruitment industry in some organizations already using AI to automate some low value tasks like interview scheduling and resume or application screening. There's some good offers out there that might be worth exploring that really can help with these mundane jobs that no one really likes to do. Delilah, I'm sure you'd agree that the problems of scheduling interviews is not fun, but is an ongoing pain in the neck for you.
Definitely something I would like to hand over and not have to deal with.
So AI allows you to scroll through, to set up interviews, and also to scroll through hundreds of job applications and screen CVs and resumes. You can have the AI go through all of those, find the ones that meet your requirements. And that means actually that it's now feasible to mine your ATS, identify candidates who had previously applied and whose applications are now wallowing in that black hole of your database. The next wave of artificial intelligence is going to be delivering smarter people analytics. So over the past few years, we've seen the introduction of dashboards into HR. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have access to talent dashboards. This is our dashboard that we use with our clients at the moment. This is not AI driven. This is providing data at an aggregate level of all the information that's coming in through it might be your HRIS, it might be your ATS, or it might be your assessment platform, which is what we're looking at here in this case. So this is a lot of data, and humans are extremely adaptable. When we're confronted with that problem, we always find a way to overcome it. And data overload, all of these dashboards, all of this data coming in, is a constant problem for us. So we tend to solve that data overload problem by restricting the amount of data that we look at. We hone in on what we believe to be the most important information, but then we simply ignore the rest. This is a technique that's definitely served us well over many thousands of years, and that we've become pretty good at balancing the quantity of data we analyze and the time we take to carry out that analysis. This leads to a reasonably good answer most of the time, but a computer doesn't need to restrict the information it's looking at. A computer is excellent at finding patterns in vast data sets extremely quickly. Pre-employment tests produce just these sorts of huge but well-structured data sets with thousands of data points, responses to individual questions, groups of questions, time taken, response variability, benchmark scores, normative data. When presented to a hiring manager, all of this data becomes, data overload. And what happens when we're confronted with data overload? Well, our initial response is indecision.
As an example of indecision, the average recruitment cycle in the US and Western Europe is 34 days. In that time, on average, a candidate's application will sit on the hiring manager's desk for at least 10 days waiting for them to decide if they wish to interview the candidate. So why would a hiring manager who has a vacancy that needs to be filled slow the hiring process down by 10 days?
Well, because that decision is complex and the answer is lost in the data being presented. When you force that hiring manager to make a decision after you've called 7 times and left increasingly frantic voicemails about how great this candidate is and how you're going to lose her if you don't schedule the interview ASAP, well, then most hiring managers being forced to make a decision, will begin to ignore aspects of the data and fixate, often on a single score or a single measure.
Yeah, I actually remember in the pre-AI days, we were supporting a large national retailer with pre-employment testing. And again, their hiring managers focused on the cognitive ability score and ignored our broader recommendations. Over a 5-year period, the head office came to resemble something like a university. And it was full of very smart people, but those very smart people couldn't seem to make a decision between them.
Yeah. We've seen quite a lot of examples like that, and the answer for many organizations was to stop gathering the data that was being ignored anyway. But that meant that they regressed to making suboptimal selection decisions based solely on past experience and hiring managers' feelings during interviews. Or some organizations pushed ahead and trained their recruitment professionals to interpret the results. This is a great solution, except it significantly increases the cost of pre-employment tests. And so we've seen over the last 20 years that assessments were often relegated to senior hires only.
Neither of these approaches seem very satisfactory. So I'd like to understand, how can AI-backed pre-employment tests solve these problems?
Yeah, okay. So if we take a step back and take another look at the problem, we see that AI's role becomes clear. Now we're reintroducing, pre-employment testing to organizations, but using AI to analyze all of these data points and deliver a fully interpreted report for the hiring manager. These reports include a very short summary with a clear recommendation. So I've got an example here on the screen. On the left-hand side is our AI-driven reports. On the right is a more traditional report with graphs and charts. The challenge with those is you have to really learn to understand what the charts mean. And not many hiring managers take the time or have the time even to be able to do that. So what AI is doing for us on the left-hand side is it's analyzing all of those charts, analyzing all of that data, and it's delivering a fully interpreted report for the hiring manager. These reports here, as you can see, are very short with a clear recommendation. So you get a fit for level score, maybe a future potential score, and a very short description of some key highlights, in this case, strengths and potential development needs. You no longer need to be trained on the interpretation. You don't even need to know which specific tests or questionnaires were used. So a modern, fully integrated report should be clear and concise without the need for graphs and charts and explanations of statistical results, so that anyone can understand it well enough to make the right decision without becoming lost in the data.
But even with the clear and decisive selection data, candidates still have to get past the hiring manager interview. And hiring managers that are interviewing are subject to a host of issues, such as unconscious bias.
Yeah, in fact, the most common thing measured by a hiring manager who's not necessarily trained in interviewing is actually the mood of the interviewer. So, as an example, we did some work with an organization that was going through a difficult time and had undertaken a large-scale restructuring. They decided that they would make everyone reapply for their existing jobs. Well, that wasn't a very pleasant experience for the employees, but it actually provided us with a very useful opportunity. because we had really good quality performance data on these people. Their reapplication process included going through our pre-employment assessments and then being interviewed by both a line manager and an HR representative. It was an intense schedule. Afterwards, we correlated the results against performance data for these people. The assessment scores were well aligned to the previous performance scores. So you can see on this graph here, the psychometric or the pre-employment assessments along the bottom, and up the side there, the performance ratings from the people over the last couple of years. And so the better they did on the psychometric assessments, the higher they were doing in the performance ratings as well. When we tried to correlate with the interview scores and past performance, it didn't look quite like this. It was rather less conclusive. So you might score extremely well on an interview and be a high performer, or you might be a low performer. You might score badly on the interviews and be a high performer or low performer. There was very little link between the two. So this was a bit of a surprise to us, and we were looking for something to help us understand what was going on. And on a whim, one of our statisticians decided to look at some other factors. And so she found a really strong correlation between the score provided by the interviewers and the time of day. So it appears that if you were interviewed in the morning or just after lunch, you scored much better than if you were interviewed at the end of the day, presumably when the interviewer was getting tired and a little fed up.
So is the real problem that interviewers are not totally clear what they are looking for? Or how can we test candidates when we really don't know what good looks like?
We do indeed need a better way of defining what good looks like. And here again, artificial intelligence can really help us. While individual skills may change, we find that the underlying characteristics of success within an organization remain surprisingly constant. If we define the set of characteristics that our best employees have in common, a success profile can be defined for the entire organization, or maybe for a particular role or function, or even a specific team. In many cases, we'll look at the entire organization and find that there are a set of common characteristics throughout, but also some role or departmental peculiarities. In that case, we might call the common characteristics culture fit. These tell you if a candidate is suitable for the organization as a whole. Occasionally, this reveals an individual who, while suited to the organization, would be better positioned in a different role or department.
Can you give an example of that?
Yes, sure. As an extreme example, and this is a little bit of an unusual one, but it definitely highlights the point. I remember a senior individual who was running a client's finance function. He was assessed as part of a broader talent review, and it revealed that he was an okay match for his role, but he appeared to have great potential for leading a sales team. I can tell you that no one was more surprised than he. It turns out that he had followed his father into accounting and had never really enjoyed it. He happened to have an extremely able number two who was very excited about taking on the role of leading finance teams, and the firm was desperate for sales leadership. So despite a distinct lack of experience, he stepped into the role and he actually immediately thrived. Within 6 months, they were reporting a significant increase in both sales closed and overall sales team morale. Exactly how you define best or success is kind of up to you as an organization. For most organizations, best means most productive. But I have been in some organizations where being well liked was more important than being productive. You can thank the public sector for that. There was a really interesting one with a bank that specialized in high net worth individuals. Their key focus was on secrecy. They had an really interesting pre-employment test. After an afternoon of interviews with a candidate, they'd take them for a drink after work, and over the course of an informal evening, that one of the team would accidentally divulge an interesting bit of gossip to the candidate. If the candidate passed that information on to anyone else, they were immediately disqualified. So it is really important to define the key characteristics that lead to success. I doubt in your organization secrecy is as important as it was for that bank. But sometimes this is simply a case of asking the hiring manager what they'd like to see, or maybe there's a job description. However it's done, it is important to really define the characteristics that best predict success.
Okay, it would be great to ask the audience another question. So if we can look at that. What defines your candidate requirements? And we have 5 here. Who defines it really? Is it the hiring manager? Is it a preset job description? Is it based on competency framework? Is it defined by you or other? We'll give everybody a minute or two to do this. And I know from my experience at the organization I work at, this is something where I am handed the job description and it is provided by the individual hiring. So a lot of times I have to work with the information that I have, and in many cases I actually try to dig in a little bit more and understand what key competencies they're looking for to help me identify the right candidates. So if Jenna, if you can show us some of the results, that would be great.
Wow, that's great. So we've got a strong leaning towards the hiring manager defining what success it looks like for their job roles, with a few people coming through with some job descriptions and competency frameworks. That's good to see. At least it's coming from a clear source. I was kind of concerned we might see lots of others there that we hadn't explored before. I think, though, that we've got a lot of this kind of backwards. Instead of success being determined or defined necessarily by a hiring manager or job descriptions or even a competency framework, or more I believe that the competency descriptions or the definitions should come from the success itself, or specifically a success profile, if we define that as a set of characteristics that our best employees all have in common. And that should be measured objectively without the biases of personal opinion. So instead of gathering a multitude of opinions about what characteristics of success look like, I'm going to propose a process that's rooted in data analytics and driven by artificial intelligence.
Okay, so maybe we can talk a little bit about why this is so important. If we can go back to the presentation. Thank you.
Let's just talk about why an objective approach would be important here. If we call it a success profile, this would provide you with a defined description of the characteristics that are important for success in the job. It'll give you an accurate template against which to recruit, and given an accurate template will give you the confidence to make faster and more accurate decisions. If we use an objective approach that uses data, then we're much more likely to be able to hone in on the key characteristics that really make a difference. And we'll also, I'll show you in a moment, going through this process, we'll be able to create a learning mechanism where we can constantly improve what we are looking for. So while it's unlikely you'll be able to find many candidates who match your success profile perfectly, you will be able to see the degree to which a candidate is aligned, and you'll be able to see specifically where they're not so well aligned.
So how exactly do we go about putting this all into practice?
Okay, yes, so I've got this slide up here, and this is going to take us through this process. It uses artificial intelligence engine to first define and then refine your success profile. But AI needs data, so we start by identifying a control group of existing employees and gathering some sort of measure on each of them. This depends on how you'll define success, but it will need to be a numerical rating. It could be a sales figure, it could be a manager's rating, results of a 360, it could be customer feedback or cultural values measures or any other dimension of success. It could be as simple as asking the people's line managers, would you hire this person again? Definitely, maybe, or just no way. I have even seen the question posed, how has this person been hired and remained in the job for more than 6 months as a success rating? Because that was all hard data that the recruiting team could get a hold of. It wasn't very sophisticated and might not be ideal, but the resulting success profile did deliver a 30% improvement on new hire retention. Ideally, the control group that you select, will have a range of people in it, some really high performers, some adequate performers, and if possible, some people who are struggling a little with the role. Next, this control group undertakes your pre-employment tests. Their results, along with the performance ratings and any other information that you might have, their education, their past experience, or anything else, this is all fed into the AI engine. If you have a data analytics team, then you can persuade them to run this through their analysis tools. There are consultancy companies out there who specialize in providing and creating these kind of models too. Or if you're using our pre-employment testing platform, you can drop your data into our AI engine. In any case, the engine itself uses a series of statistical techniques, like multiple regressions and multivariate analysis, to identify the characteristics that best predict the performance ratings that you've provided. The outcome is an algorithm that weights the most important characteristics that are aligned to success as defined by your measure. And this is our first draft of a success profile. In our experience, if we did no more, this success profile would be around 3 times better than standard interviews at picking successful candidates. But we've hardly put the AI to work yet, so the next step is to use the success profile on real candidates.
Initially, do you find recruiters and hiring managers somewhat reluctant to rely on the success profile recommendation? People are often reluctant to believe a computer algorithm, and that was certainly something I had to get my head around when I started using it.
Yes, but it isn't a bad thing to have a little challenge. I'm actually always rather secretly pleased when I hear that a client has decided to ignore the success profile recommendation. If we have done a good job of building a success profile, 9 out of 10 times we will hear back from the hiring manager about 8 months later complaining that the person is not performing or that they've left the role for one reason or another. And we can usually open up the recommendation, point to the characteristics that are mismatched with the success profile, and describe the exact problem that the hiring manager is complaining about. It's actually the best way to create a real believer in this process. We now have many clients who refuse to make a single hire without going through this process. I even had one client who wanted us to use this to help him select a wife, but luckily he couldn't come up with an appropriate control group to define the wifely success profile.
So you said that we have hardly put the AI to work. So what happens next?
Okay, every time a candidate completes the pre-employment test and is hired, their information is fed back into the AI engine. Once they've been enrolled for 6 months or so, their performance data can also be fed in. The engine can then repeat its analysis and constantly refine that success profile in real time, day after day. By constantly reviewing and refining its success profile based on real performance data, the AI engine will not only learn to identify the right characteristics for success, it will also adapt and develop the success profile to meet the changing requirements of that role over time. It'll even give you some information about exactly who you should be looking for in terms of the talent pool itself. The only time you really need to interfere with this process is if there's a dramatic or sudden change, such as a major shift in business strategy, or the role changes significantly overnight. In that case, you may need to step back and repeat the first step with a new control group and a new measure of success.
So what does our world look like with an AI engine working for us? And can you show us some examples of this?
Yeah, okay, so here's a challenge that you might recognize. How often have you delivered a candidate that meets all the requirements provided by the hiring manager or job description, only to have the hiring manager tell you that your candidates are not what they're looking for? We also see time and time again that candidates fulfill all of the requirements provided by the hiring manager, but still struggle to perform in the role. If you have a role which is very steady, then over a number of years you can work with hiring managers to refine the criteria to identify the right candidates. So an example would be the US Army. They have been hiring and training soldiers since 1775. While the details of the role have changed in the past 250 years, the personnel requirements are remarkably similar. And the US Army has had a long time to perfect their hiring criteria. They started using pre-hire testing during World War I, when over 1.5 million recruits went through their Army Alpha and Army Beta tests. And the current Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery has been in use since 1968. They don't actually call it a success profile, but the results of the ASVAB identify core Army criteria, as well as specific relevant criteria that are used to stream recruits into different branches of the organization. So when they say they need more recruits, they don't have to ask the hiring manager. They know exactly what they're looking for. But for most of us, our organizational requirements and our role definitions, they change far too frequently for us to be able to take this long-term approach. By utilizing the machine learning capabilities of your AI engine, you don't need 250 years of history. To get started, all you need is a control group with 6 months or more experience. And the characteristics are defined objectively by the success profile, not at the whim of a hiring manager. So now you have a tool that allows you to push back when a hiring manager says a candidate is not appropriate. You can ask why not. Can they explain? Perhaps their role is so different it needs something else, but more likely they're demonstrating a degree of unconscious bias that you can now challenge. So we were once running a selection campaign for a major bank, and a hiring manager rejected a candidate who fitted the success profile perfectly. When we asked, his response was simply that he wouldn't fit in here. Because we had such a clear match with the success profile, we were able to ask what exactly it was about the individual that didn't fit. The hiring manager tried to articulate his concern, but he couldn't. After a few minutes of careful prompting, he said, "Because he has long hair." As soon as he said it, he realized how ridiculous it sounded. It was a completely unconscious response to the photo of the candidate. The hiring manager quickly accepted that if the candidate agreed to cut his hair, he'd make an excellent employee.
So how might this help with culture fit?
Yeah, culture fit is an interesting challenge for us because we have to be very careful how we define culture fit and how we use it. If used incorrectly, it can quickly become bias in its own right and an excuse to not accept people simply because they're different and don't fit. What this process allows us to do is define culture fit in a very objective, data-driven kind of way. And that makes sure that we don't include biases and discrimination in the selection process, and that we are focusing on things that are much more common characteristics across the whole organization.
Does this also help improve retention and engagement?
Well, it absolutely can. One of the examples I gave earlier was an organization that managed to increase their retention rate by 30% for new hires. A lot of the challenge with people joining your organization initially is that within the first 3 to 6 months, they find that they're not comfortable there and they don't fit. Some people might adapt, but most people, if they don't feel comfortable, will simply move on. If we can identify the right people at the beginning, and we can do that using these tools, then we're much less likely to have a retention issue in the first place. And engagement is a similar aspect in that if we have the right kind of people and they can be successful, this is the best way to engage people. So this process definitely has distinct ability to improve both retention and engagement for the organization.
So an issue many of us struggle with, and one that I certainly struggle with daily, is the competition for a select few candidates. Will this process help us to broaden our talent pools?
Yes, indeed. Your success profile allows you to do exactly that. In most cases, we find the success profile puts significantly less emphasis on past experience than a hiring manager might, and significantly more emphasis on personal characteristics that determine potential. So when this becomes less important, we can begin to look at the less obvious areas to recruit from. Let me give you an example of that. There's an organization called Vista Equity Partners, and it's made this approach into a multi-billion-dollar money-making machine. Vista Equity is a private equity company that specializes in buying technology firms. One of the biggest costs in technology companies are developers' salaries. And if any of you are tech recruiters, you'll know that this market is one where there is a really fierce war for talent. Vista Partners recognizes this and has taken an approach that allows them to sidestep the maelstrom. They've worked really hard to develop a success profile for software developers that they use for recruitment. The success profile relies on a combination of pre-hire tests that include personality and cognitive aptitude tests. By focusing on a person's potential capability rather than the school they went to or the experience they've had, Vista is able to look beyond the normal high-tech hubs of Silicon Valley and the high-profile schools such as MIT. So when Vista purchases a software company and starts to grow the business, it encourages the company to invest in software talent in other parts of the country. So, for example, it's moved companies like Omnitrax and Active Networks and Vertafore and WebSense from the West Coast to places like Austin, Dallas, and Denver. These are not places that are particularly famous for their software development communities, but they're locations that have large and well-educated populations, and therefore they're bound to include some excellent programmers. They do have to screen more people to find their ideal candidates. But when you know exactly what you're looking for, screening is quick. And with fewer companies fighting for the same talent, salaries are lower and retention is higher, saving Vista companies millions each year. None of this would be feasible if Vista didn't have a very clear success profile based on pre-employment testing.
All right, Charlie, I have a final question for you. Is AI going to take away my job?
It's a question that lots of people ask, but I actually find that not that many people are really seriously concerned about this. And my answer would be certainly in the foreseeable future, definitely not. Computers, even with artificial intelligence, well, they're great at crunching data and doing it again and again. So AI is going to free you from this sort of activity. And it allows you to focus on what you're really good at, which is building relationships with candidates. AI takes away the drudgery and delivers insights that remove the indecision. And that makes you far faster and more effective in your role.
Thank you very much for that. Let's finish on a question for everybody who's listening today. If you were to implement this process and establish your own success factors, what would be the most positive impact for you? So if Jenna, if you can put up, thank you.
Absolutely. I certainly would like to see if you're using this kind of process, then you're able to identify candidates very quickly and really get to the important stage of actually building your relationship with those candidates when they fit with the kind of approach that you need. Definitely less bias. It's definitely an objective approach, this, based on talent, but based on data of talent. And we have seen many times that increase in retention because you're selecting the right people at the beginning, and so you know that they're going to get on well in the organization, and so they're much more likely to stay with you. You definitely ought to see better candidates coming through the process, and providing that standardized hiring is a great benefit for organizations all around the world. We actually worked with some companies who have reported back to us that by putting in a more rigorous assessment process using pre-employment testing, they start to attract a higher quality of candidates, because those candidates know that they're going to be working with high quality people, and so it actually becomes a positive challenge for them to go through the assessment process and become part of the organization. It definitely speeds things up, makes the hiring process much more time efficient, and again, really helps you to really focus on those relationships that you're building and really help you to understand exactly where you can add the most value. So great, yes, absolutely. I think we're going to see better candidates as well. Better candidates coming through, both because they're the right people that you're looking at, but also that you're able to look at a broader talent pool, which allows you to attract a much more diverse group of people. And we are all positively looking for diversity within our organizations. Diversity of people definitely adds a useful performance edge for any organization. And you should definitely reduce significantly your hiring mistakes. So that would certainly be an aspect that we'd see. Most organizations that have put these kind of processes into place, if they started from nowhere, put in pre-employment assessments or tests, and really define their success profile, quickly cover the costs of any implementation that they might have, simply by massively reducing the cost of making those hiring mistakes. And I like this one particularly: increased staff retention if we hire the right people for the right roles. What's really fascinating is you can actually pull people into the organization, and you can recognize that they may have applied for the wrong role, but you may have another opportunity for them that would be much more fitting to them. This actually really helps you to make sure the right people are in the right place. And of course, the same process actually can be taken through to other parts of the HR organization when looking at succession and promotion, and you can be helping people through their careers when you have this real deep understanding of who they are and what their characteristics are and how well aligned they are to different job roles and different opportunities within your organization. That's great. That's some really nice answers to see there. Jen, have we got any more coming through, or how are we doing with time here today as well?
Yeah, I think all our poll questions came in, but I do have some questions from the audience if you want to get to those now.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. I think we've got, how long have we got? 10 minutes or so left?
Yep.
Is that right?
Exactly. So first off, I personally want to say I appreciate all of the insights you've shared. I have a background in industrial organizational psychology, so everything that you said resonated well with me, in particular being objective about making decisions around talent, especially when we have the tools to do so. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
And I have a question in terms of using these tools for the hiring manager. So sometimes hiring managers and recruiters have an idea in their mind of what success would look like. And I'm wondering if you have an example or a story to share when their idea didn't match what the data show, meaning success looks different than what they were actually looking for. Do you have any stories, or I feel like that would be a powerful lesson about objective decision making around talent?
Sure, and there's two cases that are worth exploring there. One is when you go through the process and define the success profile and look at lots of aggregate data, identifying what the general characteristics of success are for that particular role. And that's when we often find that the hiring managers and the people involved in coming up with the initial ideas around what is important for hiring characteristics, they tend to focus on past experience a lot more than actually we find is really key. So what ends up happening there is that we're able to identify specific characteristics that are more to do with someone's personality, their intellectual capability, their maybe their analytic skills, or their focus on strategy, or some sorts of things like that. When we get down to the individual, the personal individual as well, we often find a similar sort of problem in that the interviewing may pull out certain challenges that may or may not necessarily resonate in the results of the assessments themselves. And that's another interesting challenge there, because you've met somebody, you've talked and interviewed with them, and you think that they're a fantastic potential fit for you, and then the assessment result comes in and tells you that this person has got some, they're not ideal for this role. And that can be, particularly depends on where you put the assessment process in, but particularly when you're down to your last couple of candidates, or you've got a candidate that you really, really thought was perfect for it, it can be a very frustrating position to be in, which is why we tend to suggest pulling the assessment process up and trying to have the pre-employment testing as early on in your recruitment process as you can, and certainly not once you got to your final candidate. But I had a client the other day tell me that they used the assessment results very specifically. He called it his backup check. And this was that if the interview results matched the testing results, he had a big red tick and was happy to go. If the interview results did not match the assessment results, then he'd spend a bit more time exploring what was going on there. And so maybe a further interview and ask some more specific questions. And we often have, that's one of the things we have to do as part of our assessment reports. We source them earlier with clear recommendations. We also need to provide interview questions. That's something we do too. Does that help? Does that answer your question, Jenna?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So, in your experience, when they're what they feel like they need in the role, and that doesn't match up with the assessment results, and say you're in an HR role or recruiting role, and you have that happen with your hiring manager, what can you tell the people who are listening who are in HR roles and recruiting roles what they should do next? Like, what kind of recommendations can they give to their hiring manager when those data points don't align?
So let me give a very specific example. An organization we were working with recently who had a list of criteria that was handed to the talent acquisition team, that was very focused on specific universities and education, what courses people did and what university and institute they went to. And so they were looking for people from, these were technologists, from MIT and other well-known technology institutes. And so when we ran that initial analysis with the talent pool, it became evident that was pretty irrelevant. They had people who were extremely successful who had never been to any kind of extremely well-known school for that. What they did have is a base level in terms of the ones who did well were graduates of computer science. They weren't coming straight out of high school and doing well, but they didn't necessarily have to go to a specific school or do a master's or anything like that. And so when we put that back to them, and we actually, the best way of getting the hiring managers on board ended up being pointing out the examples that we'd come across who are already in the organization. So yes, John and Fred and Mary, these are guys who are currently doing extremely well in your business, and they don't they did not go to MIT. And so that was a useful basis for helping the hiring managers to understand what it was that they were really supposed to be looking for. And then, like I said earlier on, sometimes the hiring managers will not agree with the recommendations of the assessment. And at least when they do that at the first few times, we then track that, and you quickly see that it comes back, and the hiring managers usually agree. Yeah, okay, so we took on 3 people and they all left within 4 months, and so those were hiring mistakes. And once they get personal experience like that, they usually become much more comfortable with accepting and trusting the results of the pre-employment tests and the algorithms that are being run there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I think that something for people who work in the assessment world, that stuff that might happen frequently. So thanks for sharing some advice for what to do there, is basically finding more evidence to support what you found through the data. So thank you. And that people who are listening, if you do have questions for Charlie and Delilah, please ask them. I have a question from Tom, and I think he's being very future focused with this question here. And he's thinking about, so technology is moving so quickly. So we weren't talking about AI very much a few years back. So if you think this time next year, you're presenting on a topic around selection and assessment and recruiting, what technologies do you think are becoming more popular? Like, what do you think you'll be talking about this time next year regarding to this topic?
Yeah, well, certainly if we ask that question that we asked at the beginning, who is using AI within their recruitment process, I would hope to see, or I'd expect to see, less than 100% of people saying they're not using it at all. I'd expect to see quite a reasonable take up there. I was actually at the AI World Conference a couple of days ago, and we were looking at HR analytics and where this is going. And there's some fascinating pieces of research going on, and some really clever bits of technology being put together. Integration is a key one. This is part of the whole move towards big data and general analytics. The first thing we have to do is connect all our different data sources so that they can talk to each other. I think this time next year, we're going to be talking less about specific data sources like pre-employment testing, and we're going to be talking about much larger data sets. So, for example, I talked about, if we go through this process of defining a success profile, you need to come up with some measures of performance. Well, actually, that's probably sitting in your HRIS, or it's sitting in various different places within your organization. If we can get those talking to each other, then the artificial intelligence is able to go and find the right data and pull this back, and so present these results without you having to do anywhere near as much manual work as we currently do. So I definitely think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. And the other piece that I expect to see is the human interaction with the computers. We've all got Alexa and Siri and Cortana in our homes now. We're going to be seeing much more of that in the workplace as well, I think, so that we can, instead of having to go through those dashboards and dig into data sets, we're going to simply be able to ask a question of the HR version of Siri, and it's going to understand our question and go and pull the results out. So who should we hire for this role, or who's ready for promotion to that role? Where are my training needs? Those kind, which is the best source of candidates? Those kind of questions we should be able to ask in natural language, and the artificial intelligence will be providing the answers back to us.
Very, very cool. That'd be so interesting. One last question from James, and he wants to know, as a global company, does the technology take into account cultural differences, language barriers, and other complexities, particular when assessing for succession across multiple offices?
So the international aspect is it's a cool area. It's a really important area. I'm lucky enough to work at HFI, who for the last 35 years has focused on global talent and work internationally. You can tell by my accent that I'm not US national, although I live here in the US now. But I've been lucky enough to work with HFI all around the world. And it is something that you have to think about right from the beginning. The first thing to think about is if you are using something like pre-employment assessments or tests, then are they going to be biased or focused on any particular one nationality or culture? And so one of the things we have to do is spend a lot of time and effort making sure that we are removing any cultural bias from that data as it enters the system. Then yes, the next thing is when you correlate against success, how you define success can be different in different cultures. And we've done some really fascinating work on what leadership means in different cultures and different nationalities. And the way that people lead is very different in, for example, Indonesia compared to Mexico compared to the US. So how you can be a successful leader might have to be defined locally, or certainly has to be carefully defined and thinking about those cultural differences. The underlying mechanism of, which is what the AI is doing, the number crunching, is exactly the same. That is definitely not a cultural issue. That is simply looking at what characteristics correlate to success. But you do need to make sure that you're measuring that initial data in a culturally unbiased way, and that you're also measuring the output, the success factor, in an unbiased way as well.
Well, thank you so much. This is all we have time for today, but I appreciate your sharing your insights and hope to have you back again sometime soon. Thank you.
Jenna, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It was a real pleasure.
And just a reminder, all of you listening, to our HCI members, today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. And for all of us at HCI, thank you for being here.